All right, hi everyone. My name is Dr. Kyle Rich. I'm faculty in the Department of Sport Management at Brock University, and I'm excited today to talk to you a little bit about a project that I've worked on over a few years, where I looked at the role of hockey tournaments in rural cultures in Canada. So you can check out this article, which is published in Leisure Sciences, if you want to read more of it. But I'm going to talk you through this work today, and the way that it's kind of played out across some time. So, a bit of background. I had worked on a few different projects. Each of them was a case study looking at one specific hockey tournament in different rural communities across Canada. And so this project really came together where I started to pull on the threads and look at the kind of similarities between these different events and how I thought they were kind of helpful in understanding the role of these events in rural culture and how and why maybe they were so important to some of the communities that I had visited and learned about. So in this paper, then I pulled these three events together to kind of look at some of those commonalities across and to really think about how these events played a role in what it meant to be rural or to have a rural identity or to participate in rural cultures. And even though those cultures look different, I was thinking about the kind of lenses through which we could understand that. So theoretically, I framed this as an analysis of the carnivalesque and mythologies. I'll get a little bit into that a little bit more as I move forward. But specifically, the analysis here, I'm talking about these three kind of themes that happened across the events. So the first is about subversion and rethinking what it means to be rural. Second is about freedom and profanation. The third is about engagement and performance. And then to kind of bring that together, I think about how these different processes that are kind of implicated in these carnivalesque type celebrations can be understood as part of the meaning making processes in what it means to be rural or what rural cultures are. So to start off, it's important to kind of define our key terms there. So there's lots of different ways that we can define rural. If we think about Statistics Canada data or the measures that they use, often we're looking at population sizes or population densities. So some definitions will say places under 10,000 people are rural. Others will use a measure of 1,000 places. But really, it's often kind of a characteristics related to either distance and density, so how far communities are from other places, and then how many people there are in the spaces that constitute these communities. But through this process, I'm really thinking about rural more as a place-based identity rather than a measure or an economic kind of characteristic. But when we look at rural places in Canada, they're often kind of characterized by similar things. So we often see rural communities that have volatile resource-based economies. So whether that's mining or forestry or fishing or farming, these are all different economies that have kind of boom and bust cycles and will have specific implications for those communities. When we look at health measures across Canada, we see that rural people kind of consistently score lower or might have poorer health outcomes than those in urban regions rather. And this is for a variety of reasons, but it's like closely tied to the social determinants of health and the socioeconomics of living in these communities. And often they're kind of rural communities are characterized by difficult cycles that come from the kind of pushing and pulling of resources and people in and out of these places. So often small places are not seen as desirable places. They're not seen as places where young people want to stay. But then as young people move out, that causes further kind of difficulties in terms of socioeconomics and economic development, as there aren't young people there to work to kind of stimulate the economy, which leads to further types of decline. So all of these ideas are kind of interrelated, and there's some of the kind of structural characteristics that make up rural cultures. And I really kind of frame these ideas in this project that I'm thinking about. So then when we think about sport in Canada, sport kind of occupies this really interesting role in rural Canada. So there's not a whole lot of research out there on sport in rural remote communities, but often it's discussed kind of in the context of community resilience. So the way that people come together in often poor circumstances or negative circumstances. Sport and recreation more broadly are times when people come together to build relationships, to share resources, and build capacity in order to try to build some sort of resilience. There's some really interesting work by Dr. Mayer at Waterloo that looked at the role of curling clubs and how they kind of mold and shift to take on different roles in communities when those communities are losing other things. So when the community loses the bar, the curling club will open up at night so that people can go to the bar and have somewhere to hang out. It will serve as a meeting place for different groups of people. It becomes the places where intergenerational connections happen when there aren't other options in communities. So there's some really kind of interesting work there that speaks to the importance of sport in rural places. So in this project, I looked at hockey specifically, and there's quite a bit of research out there that's looked at the role of hockey in the kind of Canadian nationalism and Canadian identities in Canadian community development. And so we know that hockey is an important thing. It's a culturally significant thing. And although that's changing kind of with demographics in Canada, it still remains kind of quite a prominent or strong idea in rural communities. And then in some of my own work, I've looked at the kind of politics of rural sport and rural sport development. So often our kind of sports systems are set up in a very kind of technocratic and professionally oriented kind of way, where sport is set up for people to improve, to excel, to move up the athlete development pathway. But in small places, when sometimes there aren't enough people to even field the team, this kind of doesn't work with these technocratic policy structures who are really geared for athlete development. And this kind of narrative of sport being a part of rural resilience doesn't really jive within those systems either. So it doesn't work well if our systems are set up for elite athlete development and high performance, but then communities value sport for the role it plays in bringing them together and building capacity and supporting their community. So there's these kind of tensions, I think, when we think about sport in rural communities. And that's really how I came to be interested in this stuff and excited about digging into it more. So theoretically, I kind of framed this earlier. I was really thinking about rural cultures and what it means to be or what the role of these hockey tournaments are in rural cultures. And so I approached this through the lens of the carnivalesque. So the carnivalesque, I guess kind of technically is described as a literary mode and a historical description of the social power of the medieval carnival. So if we think about our kind of modern society as being one where things are very rational, things are very technical, things are very modern, we do things for a reason, we are always kind of thinking through a lens of development and self-improvement. We don't do things that are irrational or cultural because they're seen as less valuable. But the kind of theoretical proposition here is that in this move towards these modern rational societies, we've lost something that was very important. We've lost the idea of coming together and the power of these kind of carnivalesque expressions. So the medieval carnival, and if we look to the medieval period, the carnival was a time when all of the rules in society were essentially turned on their head. So all of the power relationships were destabilized. So the wealthy were in the streets with the poor people. The kings and queens were in the streets with the peasants. There was a kind of sense of exaggeration and satire where things that were grotesque and real were celebrated and brought to the front. So especially things related to the body. So we think about things like excessive drinking, sexual activity. These were things that went from being things done in private to things done in public, things that happened in the streets. And that was the characteristics of the medieval carnival. And it was understood during that time that these periods of carnival were an important kind of pressure valve on society. So it was a time for people to let loose, to go, to party, to have these experiences that then would keep them in their social kind of structures and hierarchy at other times of the year. So broadly, this is kind of this idea, and the arguments here are that we still need these social pressure valves. We still need these times of kind of unfettered freedom where we can do these things outside of the normal rules and the things that we would do. And we still see this, if we think about the kind of festivals that happen around the world, the idea of the carnival, the masquerade, these are all drawing on this idea that there is value in us not having rules, in people and societies taking to the streets to blow off steam and to kind of rejuvenate and revitalize themselves. So these are some of the kind of key ideas associated with the carnivalesques. The other kind of approach that I pulled on here was from Barth's. So Barth's idea of myth and mythologies, and use this to kind of understand how signs ideologically represent meaning. So thinking about the signs and symbols that I observed and was able to think about at these events, and then how these signs and symbols are ultimately implicated in constructing myths about what it means to be rural. So what is a sign and what does it mean, and then how does it get wrapped up in these discussions about rural cultures and what we tell ourselves about rural cultures. Okay, so time to get into the fun stuff now. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the three projects or tournaments that we looked at here. So the first one is family hockey. So this happens in Powassan, Ontario. This is actually where I'm from. And so here the teams in the tournament are structured around families. So essentially family A will play against family B, will play against family C. So rather than it being picking your your players who are the best hockey players, you're really kind of restricted into playing with the people in your family. And so it builds these really kind of strong identity, these kin-based playing structures. The second event is the Heritage Cup. This happens in Barry's Bay, Ontario, which is just on the edge of Algonquin Park, kind of between Algonquin Park and Ottawa. And so the Heritage Cup adopts an ethnic-based play structure. So in this one, the hockey teams are grouped around the groups that settled along the Opeongo colonization road, as well as the Algonquin people. So the Irish, the Kashubians, which is a region in Poland, the Germans, and then the Algonquins are the team groups here. This one operates a little bit differently, where it operates as a very competitive tournament, but teams are allowed to source their players to anyone who can trace their family lineage to as having a phone number along the telephone exchanges that were known along the Opeongo colonization road. So they will look far and wide for people who have relatives that were some of the settlers or inhabitants in that area. And this one has different age categories. So the open division, I believe an over 35 and over 55 division, as well as a women's division. And they play throughout the weekend and do some really interesting things. So the event is a fundraiser for the local heritage societies and their museums. And they do really cool things like having food from all four groups sold at the canteen in the arena, and things like that. So lots of work to kind of communicate culture and ethnicity through this event. And then the final one is the Battle of Little Big Puck. This takes place in Maple Creek, Saskatchewan, which is west of Regina, in the southwest region of Saskatchewan. And so this event is an annual game where the local ranchers play against the local First Nations. And it's a fundraiser where they will raise money for a local charity. The whole town comes out, and the really kind of interesting and special part of this event is one, the narratives that are told around it, where the stories about collaboration and working together between these two groups are often shared. And then kind of especially part of the performance for the third period, the two groups come out completely dressed up. So you see here the rancher wearing his chaps, and the First Nation guy wearing his outfit as well. And so all the players are dressed up in the kind of traditional attire and in ways that often kind of make it difficult to play. So, they'll have things that will stop them from being able to skate the way that they should. And it turns into a big kind of celebration on the ice, and a real interesting performance. So, through each of these three events, I'm going to kind of talk through how I came to understand these and make sense of these through those ideas related to the carnivalesque. So, the first here is subversion and reconceptualization. So, when we think about how all of these events, they reorganize the sport structures away from that kind of technical, rational, development-based systems that we have. So when we think about the Heritage Cup, it traces players back to their immigration history along the colonization road, or those who are endorsed by the band office for the Algonquins. And the players have to have this relative associated with the cultural group. So the structures here on how we set up teams and how we divide them are very different. Similarly, the family hockey tournament does the same thing, where you have to be related to those groups. In all cases, so all of these events, they're often described as a homecoming, so an important time when they bring people, but especially young people, back into these communities. They all happen in the winter time, which is generally a time that is not super busy in these small rural communities. So it's a time that turns these small, quiet communities into kind of bustling hubs of activity during the winter. And in some cases, these communities have very limited infrastructure. So Powassan doesn't have a hotel or a local bar. So people come and stay with relatives. They spend most of their weekend at the arena. That becomes the bar and restaurant for the weekend. And it really turns these things upside down and makes the community have different characteristics that are not normal during that time. The second theme here is freedom and profanation. So here I'm thinking about these different kind of grotesqueries, or the kind of inappropriate things that might happen that wouldn't happen in a traditional sport setting. So in a lot of cases in these events, players who are not actually players get recruited to play. So sometimes it means that cousin or uncle who hasn't had skates on in 10 years because you need an extra player to get it done. And the other times it's someone who is, a member of the group, and when they need someone to play. And that's generally just kind of shrugged off, seen as a good laugh, right? It's something to laugh at, seeing someone try to figure out how to skate again, maybe falling and hurting themselves, having a minor injury because they're trying to go too hard when they haven't had the practice. But I think this is maybe best espoused in the Battle of Little Big Puck, where the third period really is this cultural performance, and the players' outfits restrict their ability to play. And so these items, these non-equipment, are introduced to the game that actually complicate the game, but they enhance the performance. And that makes something special. And this is also something that's understood to be controversial, right? They know and understand that other people will see this and will read this as a politically incorrect thing, but they're doing it as their way of celebrating this narrative that they want to tell. In the final minute of that game, the players also all take to the ice. All the players jump off the bench. They dump a bucket of bucks, and they just shoot them around, and they have a little kind of social time. So while they still say that they keep score, I really think that this serves to somewhat to kind of neutralize the score of the game, right? And make it kind of, we all end on the same place. We all end celebrating and visiting and having a good time. And it kind of like harmonizes this effect of competition that goes away. Off the ice, all these events are always accompanied with a party as well. At the family hockey tournament, as I said before, there's no bar in town. There's nowhere for young people to go out. So this is usually described as like the biggest party of the year. Family members of all ages cram into these small arena halls that get super hot. The floors get sticky with spilled drinks, and they become the kind of like marquee events in these communities. Sometimes, people become the kind of like main star of the show. There's always one person who takes it a little bit too far or does something a little bit crazy. And often the kind of off-ice transition is paired with these on-ice performances. So we think about or talk about a lot the folks who drank too much but then can still get up in the morning and play that 8 a.m. game. So we think about the profane drinking with the sacred acts of playing and how these kind of mix and mingle in these kind of contexts. And the joke is always, the best teams are those who can stay out all night and have a good time and still show up at 8 a.m. and score the goals and make it to the finals. And so broadly, I think this is a really interesting kind of collective celebration that takes place that mixes the kind of sport and community activities. And then finally, these ideas of engagement and performance. So at these events, I think one really interesting thing is the way that they kind of spin the sport experience, and fans and people who attend are not just consumers of the event. They're not just people who show up to watch and to cheer or to maybe purchase fan material, but they're kind of framed as active participants in the event. So these kin-based and ethnic-based structures allow people to kind of understand themselves as being more deeply engaged with fandom because they see themselves within these teams. So whether it's grandmothers who come out to cheer on their teams and they know that it's their family that they're cheering, or the in-laws and new partners who get recruited onto teams, and that's seen as a resource that's being brought into the family as well. And these are sometimes these are really visibly obvious. So at the Heritage Cup in Barry's Bay, there's 4 sections of stands, and each of those sections is dedicated to one of the ethnic groups, and everyone in the stands will show up wearing the colors of their team. So when I attended that event, I didn't know where to sit because when I walked in, I didn't have a team to identify with, and I was struck right away that I felt like I was an outsider, and I didn't understand where I should be moving in that. Very similarly, at the Battle of Little Big Puck, when I attended there, I was there with a friend who was from the area, and they were kind of serving as my insider, the person who was helping me kind of navigate and meet people and chat. And I was approached by people, and they asked me if I belonged to her, like if I was her partner or the new person, who I was with, because they clocked me as an outsider and someone who wasn't from there. And then these different iterations of these events have also kind of captured different ways of incorporating different people and involving them in play. So in different iterations of the family hockey tournament, I've seen games of shinny for young kids, so those who are just learning how to skate, skills competition for kids and adults, as well as heritage games for older kind of retired players who might play in the local old timers league. And they framed that one where they did it, those who lived east of the tracks and west of the tracks. So all those people could be involved there. And in one of these tournaments, I actually remember seeing a situation where the grandfather played in the old timers game, the grandmother and the mother played on the women's side, the father played on the men's side, and then the young girl and the young boy played in the kids' games and skills competitions. So they worked in these ways where 3 generations of men and women on both sides all had an activity in the event beyond just spectating, like an active role in hockey at the event. One of my kind of favorite performative elements of this here is the engagement of referees. So in the Battle of Little Big Puck, as you see in my image here, the referees in the third period come out dressed as as an RCMP officer and a rodeo clown, which are just the kind of really there's really powerful symbolism to that, and there's real powerful engagement of comedy and this kind of profanity in these activities, and also a reflection of the local history in the area. So, what do these all mean? I think as I kind of bring them all together and think about them, I could see these themes that run through all of them. And I'm thinking about how these events can be read as these signs that are implicated in the construction of rural cultures and what it means. The events kind of specifically embody these different values, specifically around heritage and the place-based histories of these regions. And they also reflect a subversion or kind of intentional reinventioning of rural ideas, rural identities, and rural cultures by transforming these rural spaces into busy, bustling hubs of activity, as framing them as thriving sites of celebration and retelling some of those stories about family histories, where people are from in a positive way. But I'm also thinking about the ways that this narrative of resilience, or of thinking about these communities as kind of bustling, resilient places, also kind of detracts us from some of the points about the structural inequalities that I kind of framed this talk with at the start. So this doesn't address issues of kind of economic volatility. It doesn't address the way that we have neglected the kind of social determinants of health for these rural people in these places. And so I'm cautious about overstating the role of these events in social change in the communities without addressing some of these bigger things. So I think that we need to be cautious in reading these events as overly positive, but also want to recognize the kind of interesting way that they're implicated in cultures, but then the kind of the broader politics of overlooking some of those structural events. So in summary, I'm thinking about how these kind of carnivalesque engagement of these events can be understood and read as social practices that serve to kind of reimagine the rural spaces and identities that exist there. But moving forward, I think we need to consider how the events can move beyond celebration and engage in community building that's not only inward looking, but also outward looking and transformative, or political and kind of action oriented in ways that can shape rural life for the positive. So I think we have really important things that we can learn from the way that these events and these communities have kind of reinterpreted and reinvented sport to serve those goals for their community. And I think that that's something that's really important that we can take away from this by thinking about this kind of relationship between sport and culture, and looking at the interesting ways that they've challenged these narratives of athlete development and kind of technical athlete development systems. I think we can think more broadly about the role of sport and development and community development in these different communities, and the kind of different roles that sport can take on when we're there, and how we can develop policy systems to better reflect that. Thank you so much. This is my contact info. I'd be happy to chat more if you all have questions, and I will leave it there.